Hi, I'm Johnny from ultimatepapermache.com, and I've got a new recipe for paper mache clay. I came out with the original recipe, I think, in 2008. I might be wrong, but it's been a really, really long time. I've come up with a lot of different variations of the recipe for different reasons, and new variations have shown up by other people all over the internet. It's been used by thousands of people all over the world, which is really cool. But now I've come up with a new recipe that I think is actually the best one. This is my favorite. This is the one I'm going to be using from now on. There's several reasons for that. The first one is that it doesn't use any glue at all. So I can go to the store and buy any brand of drywall joint compound that they happen to have. I'm just going to get the cheapest one they've got. Not only is it going to make it easier to find the materials, but it's also going to be less expensive because you don't have to buy the expensive glue for the recipe. What we are going to use instead is basically a slightly altered version of cooked flour and water paste. And the original recipe for that came from the Ghoulish Cop. Boy, that was a long time ago too, and I have done another video using his exact recipe, and it did work. But the reason I never did it again, even though I knew that it would work, was because you had to make two separate batches of stuff on the stove and let them cool and then mix them together. You ended up with too much, so you put the extra in the refrigerator, and then I never used it, so I ended up having to throw it out. It wasn't my style. It was just so much easier to use the glue. But I've heard from so many people who are really having a hard time getting the right glue and the right joint compound. And so I decided I'm going to go back to that old recipe. I'm going to simplify it and see if it would work. Even for somebody like me who really doesn't want to do a whole lot of messing around. I'm really impatient. I want to hurry up and get to my sculpture, and I don't want to spend all my time in the kitchen mixing up different batches of stuff. And I came up with a way that really does work. And I'm going to show you something here. I'm going to bring this up closer so you can see it. I made this several days ago. It's not really sticking to my hands. Obviously, I'm going to have to wash my hands when I get done, but it's not sticky the way paper mache clay is. It's sticky enough that it does stick to the armature. It's also really strong. Now there's a couple of things I want to mention before we get started, and the first one is that I do have a printable PDF of this recipe on my website that you can get it for free. Just go ahead and click on the link down in the description below. And the reason I put that out is that there are several steps involved, and it's just going to be a lot easier if you have a printed piece of paper in front of you when you're making it. So I'll go ahead and put that up on my website, and like I said, I will put a link to it right down below. So go ahead and look for that. And the other thing is that because there's quite a lot of cornstarch in this recipe, it is going to dry out a little bit quicker than you might be used to if you're using the original paper mache clay recipe. So you always want to keep it in a plastic bag when you're working with it. You don't have to keep the bag closed or anything, but you don't want the surface of it to dry out before you get to use it. When I'm using the original paper mache clay, I just leave it in a bowl and work with it. But with this one, you do want to keep it covered. So now let's go ahead and get started. I've got this pan on a cold stove. There's no heat on it at all. I'm adding a half a cup of water, 2 tablespoons of flour, and I'm going to whisk it up. Just want to make sure that the flour is whisked up really good. This is almost exactly the same way that we would make regular cooked flour and water paste, except I'm using half as much water. That's all. I'm going to add in a teaspoon of cornstarch, a teaspoon of sugar, and just a capful of vinegar. I don't know what the vinegar is for, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it in. I don't know what the sugar is for either, but it was in the original recipe, so that's what I'm using. I'm going to whisk it up again. You never want to put powdered cornstarch into hot water, but since I'm putting it into cold water, it should work just fine. I'm turning the heat up to, medium-high, and I'm going to stir constantly. This is going to get really thick. I definitely want to keep stirring because you don't want it to get solid and then burn onto the bottom of your pan. That wouldn't be very much fun to clean up. And what I want to do is bring it to a boil and just keep it hot enough, just maybe for a few more seconds after that, just so that the flour and the cornstarch all completely meld in with the water. They'll absorb the water entirely is what I'm trying to go for. Okay, now it's starting to thicken up. It didn't take very long. You can see that it's definitely starting to thicken. And it's starting to boil, although you can't probably see it because it's so thick. I'll leave it. There we go. Getting almost kind of rubbery, like that. It's kind of weird. Oh, that's kind of fun. But it is kind of floating around as a solid mass right now. It's easy to move it around, so I'm going to take it off the burner. I'm just putting it in this container, this glass cup. Heat-proof cup, by the way, it's important. And I'll put this in the fridge and let it cool off so that I can use it in the paper mache clay recipe. Now I've got my toilet paper all ready to go. It started out as 24 grams of toilet paper, and I put it in water, let it soak. I kind of mix it up to break it apart. Kept squeezing out water until it weighed 110 grams. And if you don't weigh it, that's what it is. It's a half a cup of wet toilet paper, but not terribly wet. You don't want it really, dripping wet. On the other hand, you don't want it too dry. That's why our friend Rex Wynn came up with the gram measurements for the air dry clay recipe, and it works really well. So that's our half a cup of toilet paper. I'm going to add half a cup of the drywall joint compound. The brand should make absolutely no difference because we're not using any glue. No Elmer's, no wood glue, no glue. So it shouldn't make any difference at all. I'm going to use all of the do-it-yourself glue that we just made. Now you watched me make this out of half a cup of water and all those other ingredients, and it is actually a little bit less than half a cup. A lot of it must have evaporated, or I don't know. Ask your physics teacher why that happened. And look, it's kind of, this is kind of fun. After it's cooled off, bring it up here. It's kind of rubbery. Is that kind of fun? Kids would enjoy that. I'm having fun with it too. We haven't got everything in it yet, but I'm going to mix this up real good. And now I'm going to start adding in half a cup of cornstarch. Since I'm not sure how much I'll need, I'll just throw in some. Probably about half of that, I guess. I kept mixing it for quite a while because I wanted all those paper fibers to be completely distributed in the mixture. I didn't want any clumps. But even though there's only about a quarter of a cup of cornstarch in there so far, it was still starting to get stiff enough that I thought it was going to start climbing up my beaters. So I went ahead and put the mixer away and started mixing it by hand. I'm going to use some more cornstarch. Got a half a cup of cornstarch in there already. Maybe that's another tablespoon. Just going to keep mixing it until I like it. And cornstarch has a tendency to slowly absorb water. So I'm kind of taking it slow. So it's getting pretty stiff. Pretty stiff. I'm going to add just a little bit more though. And it's getting hard to mix in, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend it's bread. Put a little bit on my hand so it doesn't stick to me too much. Okay, use some more. I like the way this is feeling. It's still a little bit sticky, so I'll be able to get it to stick to the armature. But it's stiff enough that I should be able to mold things with it, or use it as a sculpting medium. Just want to get that mixed in real good though. Might add just a teensy bit more. But first, I'm going to add the oil. And lately, I've been adding oil at the end when I make my paper mache clay. The oiliness of the paper mache clay makes it a little bit easier to sculpt with it. But it is wet, so it almost always needs just a little bit more flour or cornstarch after you do that. Oh yeah, it's feeling really nice now. For some reason, the way that my materials feel makes a really big difference in whether or not I like using them, and this feels really nice. So you can make a really, really nice details with it. It's holding up really well, but it's soft enough that I should be able to make a really thin layer over the armature, which is what I really like because that helps it to dry out really fast, and it is still just a little bit sticky, so I shouldn't have any trouble getting it to stick onto the armature. So that's really all there is to it, and there's a couple of questions that I know people are going to have. People always ask whenever I put out any kind of paper mache recipe, they ask if it's waterproof, and the answer to that is no. If you really want to make an outdoor sculpture, I'll put a link to the paper cement clay recipe and use that one instead, or just use plain old concrete or epoxy clay or something other than paper mache, because this stuff is really not waterproof. That's not what it's for. It's for inside sculptures. The other question that I get a lot is, can you make different layers? In other words, cover your armature with one layer of the paper mache clay, let it dry, and then add more details later. And yes, absolutely, I did test that. Really embarrassed by this guy, but I added several things. There's a little decorative thing here on his helmet. I put a little medallion down here, and the reason that I did that was actually to test it to see if you could layer it, and it works just fine. The new material sticks to the old material, and it really does work well. I did this guy really fast, and it looks really rough, but this is, when I was first putting it on, I actually took more time, and you can see that it just goes on really smooth if you take your time, and that's what you're really looking for. So making a nice smooth detailed surface is actually quite easy with this material. Now, if you do use this no glue paper mache clay recipe, and I really hope you do, I hope you come back and let us know what you think of it. Do you like it as much as I do? You might not. I mean, there may be some things that I'm missing about it, but I'm really happy with the way it came out. I really do like it better than the recipe with the glue. It really does save a lot of money, and it saves so much time running around trying to find the right joint compound, and it really does feel good to me. I really like it. So let us know what you think if you try it. You can put a comment down below, or come back to my website and show something off that you've made with it on the Daily Sculptors page. And speaking of that, showing things off, I should mention this guy, because you might have noticed he's really ugly. I decided to make an ugly space alien partly because I needed a project that I could use this material with, so just to make sure that the new paper mache clay recipe works. And it does. We've got some really fine detail. Even though I did it really, really fast, it's really rough because I was trying really hard to get it done so that I could get this video out to show you about the new recipe. But the reason that I chose this particular subject is that we've been hearing a lot about UFOs lately. I think they've mentioned it in Congress. Joe Rogan's been talking about it a lot. And I'm thinking, okay, if there have been space vehicles found, supposedly, then there must have been somebody driving them. And I've been kind of in the back of my mind, I've been thinking it'd be kind of fun to do an alien. Because, you know, the sky's the limit. You can make them any way you want to. And then when I saw a viral video about a stargazer fish that was found, I think, in Singapore, the whole video went viral. I'm not really sure why, because evidently it's a really common fish. But when I saw that video and I saw how ugly they are, but they do have kind of a human-like face. Very ugly, though. So I was thinking maybe space aliens have a completely different idea about what's pretty and what isn't, and it would make, you know, a stargazer fish, stargazer man. Why not? Now, if you would actually like to see how I put this guy together, just to see how the armature itself went together, in case you want to make maybe something else that isn't quite this weird, I will put a video about this one up pretty soon, probably in the next day or two, so be sure and watch for that. I'll put a link to it right down below in the description of this video too, just as soon as I get that one done. And in the meantime, go make something and come visit me, ultimatepapermache.com. I'll see you there.